Hello everyone, this is RealTalk USA on 105.3 Alpha FM, and it's me, Yoel Salomon, with
Mazgawa Taddesa. Good afternoon, everybody. Today we have a special guest with us, Ms. Jenifer M. Burns. Let me ask her to introduce herself, and we will ask other questions.
Yeah, hello, I'm Jenifer Burns, and I'm here representing the United States Forest Service, which is an agency in the United States that is responsible for many acres of land, hectares of land, that is used for mainly for protection of watershed values.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background?
Sure. So I have worked with the management of protected areas, national parks and monuments and national forests for over 30 years. I have a background in wildlife biology as well as architecture. So basically, for me, that means putting design with science. Mm-hmm. And I use those skills in order to enhance the visitor experience at various national parks and national forests.
What national parks and forests have you actually worked in the U.S.?
I've worked mainly in the western United States. So I've worked at Grand Canyon National Park. Many people have heard about that one. I've worked at Coconino National Forest, which is one of the biggest pine forests in the United States on the Mogollon Rim. They call it the Mogollon Rim, which is many acres of big, beautiful pine trees, and used by a lot of people for recreation, camping and picnicking. I've worked in Oregon and also in Arizona.
Mm-hmm. If I may ask, what made you get into this track?
Yeah, that's a good question. Originally I was interested in art, but I really loved being outdoors, and I really love to learn about wildlife and plants. And so I finally switched and got a degree in wildlife biology. I worked for the Park Service for a number of years, and then I went back to school and got a master's in landscape architecture. So landscape architecture is really where the art and the science come together, because then you're doing design on the land, basically.
That was going to be my next question, because I see on your bio here, developed interpretive and conservation education strategies, visitor centers, and interpretive sites. What are interpretive sites? I'm just curious.
People come to protected areas for a lot of different reasons, but one of the things that they want to do is learn about plants and animals, or they might want to learn about the culture of that place, or cultural sites, heritage sites, ancient heritage sites. And so it's important to let them explore on their own, for example. Many people like to do that. But many people also like to learn about these places through signs, or through brochures, or even through by tour guides. Mm-hmm. Tour guides, that's a very important aspect of conservation education. The United States Forest Service is one of the great providers of conservation education about protected areas, and so they have a big interest in providing venues for people to learn about their natural and their cultural heritage. So very often they'll have a visitor center that people can go to, and they can see exhibits, and they can learn about the landscape, the plants and animals that are there, the cultures that lived there at one time, or they can go out on an interpretive trail and see signs that talk about different things that they might be interested in, or they can hire a guide, or go to an interpretive program where they'll listen and learn.
Are protected areas and national parks one and the same?
Yes, they are. And so, worldwide we call these areas national parks, monuments, sanctuaries, wildlife refuges, national forests. We call them all protected areas, just as one catch-all term.
Okay. I see also that you are a subject expert for scenery analysis and management.
So the United States Forest Service is one of the largest employers in the world of landscape architects.
Okay.
It's a specialty that deals with architecture on the land. It's also a specialty that deals with the science of scenic beauty. And believe it or not, there is a science there. So,
which is very interesting. When you think about landscaping, you think about gardening, you think about your yard, you think about, artificial gardens. I mean, gardens created artificially. For me, it was very interesting to learn that there is such a thing called landscape architecture in a natural reserve environment. So maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that concept.
Yeah, so let's talk about scenic beauty. And sometimes people say beauty is in the eye of the beholder. But actually beauty can be measured. There are certain elements that come together in a landscape or in architecture that resonate as beautiful for most people. So this is the science part of it. But really what we're trying to do, the objective is that when we value as a society or a community a beautiful landscape, or say we're driving along a road and it's going through a beautiful landscape, or we have a vista point that we like to go out to and we find inspiration there from the beauty, or even with architecture. There's architecture like Lalibela, or the cultural sites in Gondor, for example, that have inherent beauty culturally. The way they're built, the materials they're built out of, and that sort of thing. So really this is the science about protecting that beauty. So for example, this is a very good example, if there is a scenic vista and people like to go out there and look out over the landscape, like Simeon Mountains, would you want to put a cellular phone tower in that view? No, you wouldn't. You would look for other alternatives. Or if you were putting some infrastructure, like a lodge or even a road, you would want to do it in such a way that it almost disappeared into the landscape. So this is sometimes very difficult to do, but not impossible. So that's what landscape architects do, is they figure out what people value as far as scenic beauty, and then they figure out methods for protecting that scenic beauty, but also allowing some development at the same time.
That's very interesting. How many countries and how many places have you been with? Because you mentioned Lalibela, you mentioned the Samin Mountains. Like, I'm sure in Ethiopia you have been to at least a few of these monuments and sites. And where else have you been, especially with your capacity as an officer of the Parks and Forestry?
The United States Forest Service, which is under the Department of Agriculture. So the United States Forest Service has a program that's an international program. Mostly Forest Service employees work within the United States for the national forests there. But this international program works in 90 countries around the world. And the Forest Service sends technical experts in various disciplines at the request of and in partnership with those countries. For a diverse number of projects. So it might be disaster relief, it might be watershed management, it might be protected area management, tourism, development, hydrology, grazing, range management. There's a big long list of things that the Forest Service can and likes to partner with other nations about. And it goes both ways. So not only is the technical expert going to another country and participating in a project, but they are benefiting from that because they're learning about that culture, and they're learning a lot of things by participating. And usually these are short assignments, say 2 weeks or a month or something like that. So I went to Vietnam to look at some tourism development in a national park there. I was recently in Liberia right before the election, actually looking at a project that USAID had constructed and how to do restoration of a road that was put through a wetland, unfortunately. I was in Botswana recently, and the government of Botswana is interested in getting assistance in updating their forest management plans for forest areas that are surrounding Chobe National Park. And I went to Russia a few times because Russia is very interested in protected area management associated with Lake Baikal, which is the largest freshwater body of freshwater on Earth, and a spectacular place. So those are some of the projects.
What was the most interesting project, or the project that resonated with you from any point in your career? Because you deal with, scenic beauty, for example. This is, I don't know, like you said, it can be measured. I don't even know what scale you use to measure stuff like this.
Yeah.
So,
you know what I find interesting is, and I'll say it's on the coast of Egypt, on the Red Sea coast of Egypt, and also at Simien Mountain National Park, because both places we were working together with various partners to try to figure out how to have responsible tourism, and in a very, very delicate ecosystem. And so that's what I find very, very interesting, because these are ecosystems that I don't know much about when I first arrive, and so part of my challenge is to learn from the experts here about the ecology of these areas. So I have to say that that's really what I enjoy most, is that learning, and then applying that learning to those situations so that some really responsible development can occur.
How many national parks or protected areas are there in the U.S. and how do you work? How do you work with the Ministry of Interior or the Department of Interior regarding the protected areas?
Yeah, and so the United States has the Department of Interior, what you just mentioned, where all this gets complicated and maybe it doesn't make sense really, but this is the way it has evolved over time. So the Department of Interior, and that department manages national parks, for example, Grand Canyon National Park, Yosemite, and Yellowstone, and many other national parks, which I can't tell you exactly how many, but then the Department of Agriculture manages the United States Forest Service areas. And there are many national forests in the United States, and that is all under the Department of Agriculture. And originally that was because they're multiple use areas. They're not like national parks, which are for preservation for the most part. National forests are for conservation, so different uses occur. Grazing occurs, hunting occurs, some agriculture might occur. Certainly tourism occurs. There might be hydroelectric projects that go on, things like that. It's multiple use. So that's the difference. But both of them accommodate a great deal of visitation by people who want to do recreation, picnicking, hiking, looking at vistas, getting inspiration from the land.
Looking at places you haven't been to yet, but are claimed to have natural beauty. What is on your bucket list? It should also be. It will probably be on my bucket list once you say it.
I mean, Ethiopia. I would like to spend more time in Ethiopia because it's really, really beautiful.
This is a continental show, by the way, so you can pick and just any country in the entire world.
Oh, well,
any spot.
I have to say that there are many places in Africa that I would like to visit. Yeah, and I especially like, just me personally, I like to bird watch. Okay. So I mean, I'm not what's called a life lister, so I don't really have to write every bird down that I see, but I'm very interested in the ecology of birds. And Africa just has some spectacular bird watching. So, Botswana, Ethiopia has some great bird watching. But I also like those areas in Africa where still you can find wildlife that is moving about fairly freely and it's not fenced. These places are becoming rarer, but hopefully not too rare. So yeah, I'd like to visit more of those areas. And do you have any idea where those places are? Well, there's a place called the Kaza, which is the 5-country area between Namibia, Botswana, Zambia, Zimbabwe, and South Africa. Yeah, and there's a lot going on there. There's a lot of conservation work going on there as well.
Good.
Based on your knowledge and experience, what do you advise Ethiopian authorities or Ethiopians or
in general,
countries,
population.
Countries around Africa to preserve their forests.
I can say, I'll tell you something about that, which is that, I was trying to show very tangibly why some places in Ethiopia are so critical to not overgraze, to protect the natural vegetation, especially in what we call the roof of Africa, which is Ethiopia has. I mean, Ethiopia has most of the high country in Africa. 80% of all the country that's over 4,000 meters, something like that, is in Ethiopia. And so all that rain that falls from the clouds onto the roof of Africa is coming down in these rivers and of benefit to millions and millions of people. So I was trying to show what happens when rain falls on the roof of Africa, and there's a nice sponge of vegetation to hold that rain and to meter that water out at a natural rate. Is very important. So we want to maintain that vegetation. We don't want to have it grazed down too far. Versus if it's eroded and grazed, and like some places in Ethiopia have grazing that is some experts say is 6 times what it should be. So it's very, very intense. But anyway, so when the rain falls on land like that, it runs off very quickly, it takes the soil with it, fills up lakes and with sediment, and it becomes a very big problem. So that then when you have climate change or climate disruption, that just adds to that issue. So that's one of the primary reasons I think that it's important to look at those places and be very, very careful about development in that high country.
This is a question we ask all of our American visitors. This is a USAU program, so the one thing that we want to get from every guest is what they love most about the United States. Anything ranging from the freedom of expression to its diversity. That's something that resonates with you.
I certainly like its diversity. But yeah, I would have to say for myself that I live in the western United States. I was raised in the eastern United States where there are not a lot of public lands. So there's a lot of fences, a lot of private land, and you can't just walk out into the woods and enjoy yourself. But in the West, and some communities complain about this because they think there's too much federal land, but I like it because I go out camping, I go driving for pleasure out on the roads, the back roads in the national forests. I can go to the parks and get inspiration. I can paint, I can just sit in a chair and read or whatever, bird watch, of course. So that's what I like.
Good, fantastic.
Okay.
Anything else you want to add?
Just that it's really wonderful to visit here. Everybody is so hospitable.
Thank you.
Yeah, and so interesting to talk with. And I just find people really like to have discussions and open up about things going on in their neck of the woods here in Ethiopia. So it's really rewarding to visit here. So thank you for that.
You're very welcome. We're very glad that you're enjoying your stay here in Ethiopia. And thank you so much for being on RealTalk USA.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
That's it from us, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.